The war room of the Concord went silent when the human transport docked, because everyone aboard had expected a warship, and instead the ramp lowered to reveal a single, tired woman carrying a medical bag. Fleet-Marshal Vess of the Threnn Dominion had studied humans for 11 cycles. He had read the reports, memorized the casualty models, argued in the high chambers that the human species was a threat that must be managed carefully. And now, standing on the observation deck of the largest orbital station in the Kelli system, watching the feed from the docking bay, he felt something cold settle in his chest that was not quite relief and not quite fear. They had sent a doctor. The Kelli system was dying. That was the simple truth beneath all the politics. A plague had bloomed on the Third World 8 months ago, something that moved through the Kelli people like fire through dry grass, and it did not kill quickly. It hollowed them out. It stole their memories first, then their names, then their ability to recognize their own children, and finally, mercifully, it stopped their hearts. 19 million dead, 40 million infected. And the Galactic Concord, that great council of 100 species, had done what the Concord always did when a small and unimportant people began to die. It had held a vote. The vote had failed. Quarantine was cheaper than cure. The Kelli system was blockaded, its shipping lanes sealed, its distress calls logged and archived and ignored. The Kelli were a minor species, a people of farmers and singers with no fleet worth the name and nothing the greater powers wanted. Letting them burn out was, the Concord agreed with heavy and dignified sorrow, the responsible choice. Containment. The needs of the many, only humanity had voted against the quarantine. And when the quarantine passed anyway, humanity had done a strange thing. It had asked permission to send aid. And the Concord, amused, had granted it, because the Concord wanted to see what the young and reckless human species would waste on a lost cause. Everyone had expected the humans to send a fleet, to break the blockade in a grand gesture, to make speeches, to turn a dying world into a stage for their famous stubbornness. The betting pools on the station had run hot for days. Would the humans fight the blockade? Would they be turned back? Would they start a war over a species most of the galaxy could not name? Instead, they had sent one ship, unarmed, and on it, one woman. Her name, the manifest said, was Dr. Aria Sood. Her rank was listed simply as physician. She had brought no soldiers, no weapons, no diplomats. She had brought crates of equipment and a small team of 6, all medical, and she had come to the plague. On the observation deck, Vess's aide made a sound that in the Threnn language served as a laugh. "That is their answer," the aide said. "One healer against a world of the dead. They have surrendered before they began. The humans finally learned the shape of the galaxy." Vess did not laugh. Vess had read the reports the others had not bothered to finish. And Vess was thinking about a single line buried in the human archives, a line that had kept him awake through more than one sleeping cycle. Humans do not send doctors to wars they intend to lose. He watched the small woman shoulder her bag, look up at the vast dark station above her as if measuring it, and walk into the quarantine zone without hesitation. "No," Vess said quietly. "I do not think they have surrendered at all." Aria Sood had not slept properly in 3 weeks, and she did not expect to sleep properly for many more. The Kelli homeworld was worse than the reports. Reports were always cleaner than the thing itself. She had seen the numbers, the projections, the neat clinical descriptions of the pathogen's progression. None of it had prepared her for the smell of the field hospital in the capital city, or for the silence of a children's ward, where the children no longer remembered how to cry, or for the way the Kelli healers looked at her when she stepped off the shuttle, not with hope, because they had run out of hope months ago, but with a kind of exhausted disbelief, as if they could not understand why anyone had come at all. Their lead physician was a Kelli named Toma. He was old, his fur gone grey at the muzzle, and he had lost his wife and both his daughters to the plague in the first month. He met Aria at the hospital gates and did not bother with ceremony. "You are the human," he said. His translator rendered his voice flat and tired. "They told us you were coming, one of you." "One of me for now," Aria said. "More of me later, if I do my job right." Toma studied her. "The Concord sealed our skies. No ship comes or goes. How do you plan to bring more of anything?" "That's a problem for next week," Aria said. "Show me the sick. Show me your data. Show me everything you've tried, and everything that failed. We start there." "We start there." Toma had expected speeches. Every visitor gave speeches. The ones who had come in the early days, before the quarantine, the sympathetic ones who wrung their hands and promised to raise the matter with their governments, and then left and were never heard from again. He had grown to hate speeches. This human gave none. She simply set down her bag, rolled up her sleeves, and asked to see the dying. Something in him, some small ember he had thought long dead, stirred. He showed her everything. The plague, the Kelli called it, the forgetting, and the name was crueler than any technical designation because it was accurate. It attacked the nervous system through a mechanism the Kelli researchers had partly mapped but could not counter. It rewrote proteins in the brain. It was not, strictly speaking, contagious in the way the Concord had claimed. It spread through a specific vector, a parasite carried in the system's own native insect life. And it had jumped to the Kelli only after a century of terraforming had disturbed the deep soil where the parasite slept. The quarantine of the shipping lanes was, medically speaking, useless. The plague could not cross space on its own. It had never needed to. It was already home. Aria understood this within her first 3 days. She understood something else too, something that made her go very quiet and very still in the small hours when she thought no one was watching. The Concord's own scientists must have understood it as well. The quarantine had never been about stopping the spread. There was no spread to stop. The quarantine was about not having to pay for the cure. It was a wall built not to keep the plague in, but to keep the guilt out. She did not say this to Toma. He had enough grief without adding rage to it. Instead, she worked. The first month was a war of small failures. Aria's team of 6 was good. She had chosen them herself, the best she could take on a single ship. Virologists and geneticists, and one brilliant, half-feral young synthetic biology specialist named Quan, who had not slept a full night since he was 20 and did not intend to start now. They set up in the ruins of the Kelli Research Institute, and they threw themselves at the parasite's genome. They lost patients. They lost them daily. Aria learned the Kelli morning song by ear because she heard it so often, a low 3-note fall that the healers hummed when they closed a patient's eyes, and she caught herself humming it in her sleep. She stopped counting the dead somewhere in the second week, not because she had stopped caring, but because the number had become a weight she could not carry and keep working, and the work was the only thing that mattered. She sent one message off-world in that first month. It went to the Concord relay, brief and formal, requesting expanded medical resources under the terms of the aid agreement. The Concord's response came back in 6 days, polite and empty. Request no request under review. Request archived. The aid agreement, she understood then, had been a joke. A permission to fail with dignity. They had let humanity in to watch it break its heart against a wall. She read the message twice, then deleted it, then went back to the lab. Quan found her there at some hour past midnight, both of them staring at the same protein model they had been staring at for a week, the one that would not resolve, the one that held the whole thing hostage. "We're not going to crack this in time," Quan said. He was not a dramatic person. He said it the way he might have read a weather report. Not with what we've got. The parasite's got a redundancy in its expression pathway. We knock out one route, it opens two more. We'd need a delivery system that adapts as fast as the target does. We don't have that. Nobody has that. Somebody has that, Aria said. Quan looked at her. Earth has that, she said. The Meridian Labs were 3 years from a self-adapting therapeutic vector when I left. 3 years from a clean version. But there's a dirty version, a prototype. It's not approved. It's barely tested. It nearly killed a research animal in the last trial, and the ethics board shut it down for a decade of review. And you want to bring it here. I want to finish it here, Aria said. On the parasite itself, with real data, in real time. It's the only pathogen fast enough to teach it. She rubbed her eyes. It's also the reason I came alone, Quan. If I'd come with a fleet, the Concord would have watched every crate that came down that ramp. They'd have flagged the vector prototype as a weapon. It adapts, it self-replicates, it rewrites biology on the fly. To a frightened bureaucrat, that's not a cure, that's a bioweapon. And they'd have had every legal right to seize it, and every political reason to want to. Quan was very quiet for a moment. You smuggled it, he said, in a doctor's bag, because nobody searches a doctor. Nobody laughs at a doctor either, Aria said. They laughed at us for sending one person. Good, let them laugh. Nobody watches the thing they've already decided to pity. The reversal, when it came, did not come from the lab, it came from the sky. The Threnn Dominion's Fleet-Marshal Vess had been watching the Kelli system for 2 months, and he had grown increasingly troubled. Not by the humans, by his own people. The Threnn were not a cruel species, whatever the smaller peoples of the Concord believed. They were a frightened one. Long ago, before Vess's grandmother's grandmother, a plague had come through the Threnn homeworlds. Not the Kelli forgetting, but something like it, something that had killed 1/3 of the species before it burned out. The Threnn had survived by doing the unthinkable. They had sealed their own infected worlds. They had let their own people die behind quarantine walls, rather than risk the spread. It had worked. It had saved the species. And it had scarred the Threnn's soul so deeply that quarantine had become not a policy, but a religion. When the Kelli began to die, the Threnn had voted for the wall not out of malice, but out of memory. We did this to ourselves once. We survived. So must you. Vess had voted for the quarantine too. He had believed in it. And then he had spent 2 months watching a single human woman refuse to die of despair in a place his own vote had condemned, and the belief had begun to crack. He requested the medical logs from the Kelli surface, officially for containment monitoring, unofficially because he needed to know what she was doing. What he found was a species being pulled back from extinction, 1 patient at a time, by 6 people and a bag of equipment. The death rate in the capital had stopped climbing. It had not fallen yet, but it had stopped. Against every model the Concord had run, it had stopped. And then Vess found the other thing, the thing that changed everything. His intelligence officers had flagged an anomaly in the human supply manifest, a discrepancy in the mass of 1 crate, a crate logged as sterile field equipment that had never been opened for the standard equipment purpose. Cross-referenced against human research databases his people had quietly scraped over the years, the anomaly resolved into a name. An adaptive therapeutic vector, unapproved, self-replicating. Capable, in principle, of rewriting living biology faster than any natural system could resist. To Vess's intelligence officers, it was obvious. The humans had smuggled the bioweapon into a Concord quarantine system. Vess stared at the report for a long time. Then he did something that would later be studied in the Threnn War colleges for 100 cycles. He did not report it up the chain. Instead, he took a shuttle down through the quarantine, alone, and went to find the doctor himself. She was in the children's ward when he found her, and he stopped in the doorway because he had not expected what he saw. She was holding a Kelli child. The child was small and grey-furred and clearly very sick, and it was fussing weakly, and the human woman was holding it against her shoulder and humming the Kelli morning song, except she had it slightly wrong. Had turned the falling third note upward at the end, so that it was no longer a song for the dead, but something else, something that sounded, absurdly, like a lullaby. The child was calming. The Kelli healers were watching her with expressions Vess could not read. Vess was a Fleet-Marshal of the Threnn Dominion. He had commanded battles. He was not accustomed to feeling like an intruder. "Dr. Sood," he said. She looked up. She did not seem surprised, and she did not seem afraid, and both of those things struck him as strange, because a Threnn Fleet-Marshal appearing unannounced in a quarantine zone should have been either. "You're Threnn," she said. "High Command, from the insignia. You've come a long way to see me." "I have come," Vess said carefully, "because I know what is in your crate." The Kelli healers went still. Aria did not. She adjusted the child on her shoulder, and she looked at him, with eyes that were exhausted past the point of fear. "Then you know it's a cure," she said. "I know it is a weapon that has not yet been used as one." Vess stepped into the ward. "I know that if I report it, the Concord will seize the system by force, arrest you, and end whatever you are doing here. I know that adaptive vectors are prohibited under the Ashfall Accords for reasons my own species wrote into that law. We wrote them because we know what happens when biology is turned into a tool." His voice was very level. "So tell me, human, tell me why I should not do what my law and my history both demand." Aria was quiet for a moment. Then she walked to him, still carrying the child, and she held the small grey body out toward him. "Hold her," she said. "I do not. Hold her. You came all this way. Hold the thing you voted to let die, and then tell me about your law." And the Fleet-Marshal of the Threnn Dominion, to his own astonishment, took the child. It weighed almost nothing. It turned its face into the crook of his arm, seeking warmth, the way the young of 100 species did, the way his own children had once done. It did not know he was the enemy. It did not know he had voted for the wall. It only knew he was warm. "That vector," Aria said quietly, "is targeted. It only replicates in the presence of the parasite's specific protein signature. Outside this system, in any other body, it does nothing. It dies. I built the lock myself. I can show you the code. I've been showing everyone the code. It's in every log I've sent the Concord, buried in the technical appendices nobody reads because nobody expected the doctor to be worth reading." She met his eyes. "I didn't hide it because it's a weapon, Marshal. I hid it because your Concord would have called it one, and I didn't have time to argue. These children don't have time for me to argue." Vess looked down at the child in his arms. "Your law is a good law," Aria said, gentler now. "You wrote it out of pain. I understand that. But you wrote it to stop people from turning medicine into murder. You didn't write it to stop medicine. Somewhere along the way, your people forgot the difference. The whole galaxy forgot the difference. You built a wall to keep a plague out, and then you kept building walls, and now you build them out of habit, around anyone who's inconvenient to save." She reached out and, very carefully, tucked the child's blanket closer. "I'm not here to break your law. I'm here to remind you what it was for." For a long moment the Fleet-Marshal did not speak. Then he said, "Show me the code." She showed him the code. All of it. And Vess, who had been trained in 100 forms of warfare and knew enough of biology to follow the shape of a genome, saw that she had told the truth. The vector was a scalpel, not a sword. It could only cut one thing. Outside this dying system, it was inert, harmless, a key with only one lock in the entire galaxy. It was, in fact, one of the most careful pieces of work he had ever seen. She had built more safeguards into it than the law required. She had built them because, she said, if it ever got loose and hurt someone, it would prove the Concord right, and she would rather let a patient die than hand the wall builders their justification. Vess understood then the thing the reports had never captured, the thing the betting pools on the station had gotten so catastrophically wrong. The humans had not sent a doctor because they were weak. They had sent a doctor because a doctor could carry in a single unsearched bag past a blockade of 100 warships the one thing a fleet never could, a cure that the law itself would have destroyed. They had sent a doctor because they had understood something about the galaxy that the galaxy did not understand about itself, that the Concord feared strength and pitied weakness, and that pity was the one blind spot big enough to slip a miracle through. They had let the galaxy laugh. The laughter had been the plan. You knew, Vess said slowly. Your people knew the Concord would never approve the cure. They knew it would be called a weapon, so they sent it when no one would look. We asked nicely first, Aria said. For 8 months, we asked, we voted, we petitioned, we begged. Your Concord archived every word. So yes, when asking failed, we stopped asking. She closed the code display. We're not very good at giving up. It's the thing everyone underestimates about us. They think it makes us dangerous. Mostly, it just makes us tired. Vess was quiet. You could report me now, Aria said. You'd be within your rights. But you came down here alone, Marshal, without telling anyone. You didn't come to arrest me. You came to be convinced. So let me finish the job. Let me convince you. The escalation came from the Concord. Aria had known it would. The moment the Kelli death rate began to fall, and it was falling now, the vector working through the field hospitals faster than anyone had dared hope, patients waking with their names again on their tongues, the moment the impossible started happening, the Concord noticed. And the Concord, which had built the wall to avoid the cost of the cure, now faced a far worse cost, the proof that the cure had been possible all along. If humanity could save the Kelli with one ship and one doctor, then the quarantine had not been prudence. It had been abandonment. 19 million dead, not because they could not be saved, but because saving them had been voted too expensive. Every species that had voted for the war would have to look at that. Every government that had signed the containment order would have to explain it. It was easier, for some the Concord, to make the miracle a crime. The charge came down through official channels, formal and cold. The human medical mission stood accused of deploying a prohibited adaptive biological agent within a Concord quarantine zone in violation of the Ashfall Accords. A Concord enforcement squadron was dispatched to the Kelli system to seize the agent, arrest the human team, and place the surface under direct military administration pending investigation. They were coming to save face by stopping the cure. Aria got the warning from Vess, who got it before she did, and who came to her with an expression she had learned to read now, in the weeks they had worked side by side. They will be here in 2 days, he said. A full enforcement squadron. They will take the vector, they will take you, and they will stop the treatment, because to let it continue is to admit the wall should never have been built. He paused. The Kelli are perhaps 60% treated. The rest will not survive without the vector. If it is seized, 20 million more will die, to protect a vote. Aria absorbed this. She had known it was coming, and it still landed like a blow. How long to treat the rest? Quan asked. He had gone grey in the face. 9 days, Aria said. Minimum. The vector's fast, but the population spread across a whole world. 9 days if everything goes perfectly. We have 2. The room was silent. And here was the moment the human woman would be remembered for, though she did not know it yet. Here was the choice. She could fight. Vess had, quietly, begun to gather Threnn ships loyal to him. Not many, but enough, perhaps, to contest the enforcement squadron, to buy time by force. There were Kelli who would fight too, though they had almost nothing to fight with. She could turn the dying world into a battlefield. She could make the Concord's crime cost the Concord blood. Part of her, the tired, furious part that had deleted the archive rejection and gone back to the lab, wanted exactly that. And she could win, maybe, for a while. Long enough to kill a great many people on both sides and turn a medical mission into a war and prove, to a galaxy that already feared it, that human stubbornness was a thing to be walled off, after all. She sat with it for a long time. Then she did the hardest thing. No, she said. No ships, no fighting. Marshal, stand your people down. If we fight them, we prove them right. We become the weapon they need us to be. And even if we win the battle, we lose the argument. And the argument is the only thing that saves the next dying world, and the one after that. She stood. There's another way. It's worse for me. It's better for everyone else. So we do that one. What way? Vess said. We give them what they came for, Aria said. All of it. Willingly. On a live Concord feed, with every government watching. The enforcement squadron arrived to find no resistance. They found, instead, a broadcast. Aria had spent the 2 days not hiding the vector, but documenting it. Every line of code, every safeguard, every patient record, every death from before arrival, and every recovery after it. She had compiled the 8 months of the Concord's archived rejections, time-stamped and complete. She had recorded the Kelli morning song and the number it had been sung for. And she had asked Vess to do one thing, the thing that mattered most, the thing only he could do. She had asked him to open the feed to the full Concord assembly and vouch on his honor as a Threnn Fleet-Marshal. That what they were about to see was true. He did. The galaxy watched a human doctor stand in a field hospital full of recovering children and hand the Concord enforcement commander the vector, freely, with the code open for any scientist in the assembly to verify. She did not resist arrest. She held out her hands for the restraints, and while she did it, she talked. Not a speech. She had promised herself no speeches, just the truth, plainly, the way she'd shown Toma, the sick, on her first day. This cure works, she said. You can all see that it works. You can see it only kills the parasite and nothing else, because I built it that way, and the code is right there. You can see the Kelli are living. You can see that they could have been living 8 months ago, all 19 million of them, if the cost of a cure hadn't been voted too high. She let them put the restraints on. You came to arrest me for saving them. Fine. Arrest me. But there are 20 million people on this world who are still sick, and the vector in that crate is the only thing that can reach them in time. If you seize it and stop the treatment, they die, and you'll all have watched me tell you so. On the record, every one of you. She looked directly into the feed. I'm one person. You can wall me off. You've had a lot of practice, but you can't wall off what you just watched. So here's the only question that matters, and it's not about me. Do you finish this, or do you let 20 million people die to protect a vote you already know was wrong? And then she stopped talking, because she had said the true thing, and true things did not need to be repeated. The reveal, the real one, the one beneath the whole story, landed not on the humans, but on the Threnn. Because when the feed reached the Concord assembly, it reached the Threnn homeworlds too, and it reached the deep archives, and it woke something the Threnn had buried for 300 cycles. Fleet Marshal Vess had told Aria that the Threnn had once sealed their own infected worlds to save the species. It was true, but it was not the whole truth, and Vess had not known the whole truth until, in the hours before the broadcast, he had gone digging into the sealed records of his own people's plague, because a human woman had made him ask, for the first time in his life, whether the wall his people worshipped had ever really been necessary. What he found broke him and remade him in the same moment. The Threnn plague, 300 cycles ago, had also had a cure. A young Threnn physician had developed it in the final year, a treatment that might have saved the sealed worlds, and the Threnn High Command of that era, frightened, grief-stricken, certain that any risk was too great, had refused to deploy it. They had let the sealed worlds die with the cure sitting in a lab, because deploying it meant reopening the quarantine, and reopening the quarantine felt like inviting death back in. They had chosen the wall over the cure. And then, because the truth was unbearable, they had buried it. They had rewritten the story. They had taught their children that the wall was the salvation, that there had never been another way, that the deaths behind the quarantine had been a noble and unavoidable sacrifice. Every Threnn alive had grown up believing the lie that made the wall holy. And Vess, standing in the Concord assembly with the human doctor's broadcast still hanging in the air, put the two stories side by side, the Kelli dying behind a wall with a cure within reach, and his own people, 300 cycles ago, dying behind a wall with a cure within reach. And he understood that the Threnn had not voted to quarantine the Kelli out of hard-won wisdom. They had voted to quarantine the Kelli to protect the lie. Because to save the Kelli with a cure the Concord had refused was to prove that the wall was never salvation. It was only ever the cheaper grief. And if that was true for the Kelli, it was true for the Threnn dead. 300 cycles of a people's most sacred story, revealed as a monument built to hide a choice they could not bear to have made. The galaxy had misunderstood the humans, but the Threnn had misunderstood themselves, and that was the deeper wound. And it was a human doctor who had, without ever meaning to, pressed her thumb against it until it opened. Vess did not have to decide what to do. He had already decided the moment he held a dying child in his arms and could not report it. He simply stood in the full assembly before every government of the Concord, and he told them what he had found in his own archives. He told them the truth about the Threnn plague, the buried cure, the holy lie. He confessed his species' oldest shame to the entire galaxy, on the record, so that no one could ever wall it off again. And then he said, in the flat, tired voice the translators rendered so poorly and that carried anyway, "My people built the first wall out of grief. Every wall since we have built out of the fear of admitting the first one was a mistake. This human came to a dying world with a bag and a cure, and no weapons. And she has shown us the thing we spent 300 cycles hiding from ourselves. There is a difference between a wall that protects and a wall that only spares us the cost of caring. We have forgotten it. She has not." He looked at the restrained human on the feed. "I will not seize the cure. I will escort it. Every ship under my command will defend the treatment of the Kelli until the last of them is well. If the Concord wishes to arrest someone for saving 20 million lives, it may begin with me." The Concord did not arrest anyone. It could not, in the end. Too many governments were watching. Too many of them had populations who had also watched. Populations that had seen a doctor hold out her hands for restraints while children recovered behind her. Populations that now knew a cure had existed for 8 months and been archived. The politics that had built the wall could not survive the daylight. One government, and then another, and then a cascade, withdrew their support for the enforcement action. The charges against Aria Sood were quietly suspended, then dropped. Then, in the way of such things, reframed by the same bodies that had brought them as a regrettable procedural error made in good faith. Aria did not care what they called it. She cared that the crate was reopened, and the treatment resumed. And Vess's ships held the sky while her team and the Kelli healers worked through the 9 days, and in the 12 days it actually took, because nothing ever goes perfectly. And then it was done. The Kelli lived. Not all of them. 19 million were still dead, and no cure could reach back and undo that. And Aria carried those 19 million with her for the rest of her life, the way she carried the morning song she had turned into a lullaby. But the 40 million who had been infected when she arrived, the 40 million the galaxy had voted to let burn out behind a wall, they lived. They kept their names. They recognized their children. The capital city sang, and for the first time in 8 months, the song had left the walls with the same date at the back of the passengers. The Concord, in the aftermath, rewrote the Ashfall Accords. But a new clause was added, drafted by a coalition that had never worked together before, and that included, to the surprise of the entire galaxy, the Threnn Dominion. The clause created a duty of rescue. No species facing extinction from disease could be quarantined without a binding, funded, galaxy-wide effort to cure it first. The wall could still be built, but never again to save the cost of caring, only ever to buy the time to help. They named the clause after the Kelli word for the upturned note at the end of the morning song. It did not translate cleanly into any other language. The closest human rendering was something like, stay. Fleet-Marshal Vess resigned his commission and spent the rest of his years working to unbury the true histories of a dozen species, starting with his own. He and Aria stayed in contact. They were not quite friends. Their peoples were too different, their languages too imperfect for that. But they were something. Once, years later, he asked her whether she had known, when she stepped off the shuttle alone into the laughter of the whole galaxy, that it would end the way it did. No, she told him honestly. I didn't know it would work. I only knew that if I brought a fleet, they'd have a war to talk about, and nobody would have to look at the children. A doctor's harder to look away from. That was all I had. I gambled that the galaxy's pity was bigger than its cruelty. She was quiet a moment. It was close. But it was. The Kelli tell the story differently now, the way peoples do when a thing becomes a legend rather than a memory. In their telling, the doctor is taller, and the ship is grander, and the words she spoke are more beautiful than the plain, true things she actually said. That is all right. Legends are how the small and the saved keep their gratitude from wearing out. But the children's ward in the capital kept one thing exactly true. Above the door, where every parent could see it as they carried a well-child home, they carved the line that a Kelli healer named Toma had spoken on the day the last patient walked out cured, an old man who had lost a life and 2 daughters to the war, and who had learned, from a tired human who gave no speeches, that grief did not have to become a reason to let others die. He had watched the humans pack their crates for the long trip home. He had watched the galaxy that laughed at one doctor fall silent before what she left behind. And he had said the thing that the Kelli carved above the door, the thing that changed the meaning of every wall the galaxy had ever built. The thing that 100 species would repeat for 100 cycles whenever someone argued that mercy was a weakness and the cheaper grief was wise. They sent one healer, and we called it an insult. They knew we would. That was how they got her past the guns.